Before we begin, the Differently Brained team acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we record, edit, and stream this podcast. We pay our respects to all First Nations peoples and their elders, past, present, and emerging. We extend that respect to all First Nations cultures and their ongoing connection to the lands, waterways, and communities. Now on with the show.
I don't know whether this is like a show that has a cold open, but I realized about 15 minutes ago that this is the first podcast I've ever been on where I've been a guest.
Yeah.
Not like one of the showrunners. So I had a full-blown panic and I was like, I don't know what kind of show this is. Is this a very serious sit down? And I've listened to the show, by the way. Like I know in my brain what the show is, but I was like, I don't know what kind of show this is. Is this one of those like sit down and chat shows? Should I make a coffee? Should I get a wine? What do I do with my hands? Where are my hands normally at? So in a moment of multi-stage thinking, I've settled on, I've made a cup of coffee, but I've also lit a candle. So
that's nice and intimate.
Those two things kind of balance each other out. Like it's intimate, but it's also professional.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's meditative. You know, I'm all for like setting up a candle to make things a little bit more scented. I've talked about it extensively on our podcast before. So good on you.
Yeah.
But yes, welcome.
Hello, by the way.
Oh, hi. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Differently Brained. I'm Lachlan Rutherford, and I am filling in for myself and also Jacinta Dietrich today because she's feeling a bit under the weather. But we've got a guest today who you've already heard speaking at length about his candle habits. And if it isn't obvious already, I know this person quite well. But without further ado, let me introduce this mysterious man. Today we're talking to Simon McCarthy, who is a journalist working at the Newcastle Herald in New South Wales. He writes news, features, and produces video and multimedia for the Herald and the Weekender magazine. And he contributes regularly to the Newcastle Herald's daily topics column and is the co-creator and producer of the Toohey's News podcast, which is why his audio sounds amazing. Simon has worked as a journalist in regional New South Wales since 2013 and joined the newsroom at the Herald in 2017 from the Northern Daily Leader in Tamworth. Simon spends his weeknights racked with existential dread. We're not precariously balancing between caffeine jitters and regret. He enjoys Hunter Chardonnay and long walks on the sunset. And Simon is close personal friends with the creators of the highly successful podcast, and I hope that I'm pronouncing this properly, the highly successful podcast Differently Brained, and family believes in nepotism for getting ahead in this economy. Simon, thank you so much for joining me today and having a bit of a chat.
Okay, I'm going to say two things right off the bat. First of all, I've listened to the show a lot. It's excellent, by the way, and I'm very, very happy to be here. Thank you for having me on. But I didn't realize that the guest had to sit there and like hear their own introduction, like having you guys read all this other stuff.
How does it feel?
Look, I don't know how I feel about it, to be honest, because, well, I'm on my own. I'm in a very nice room at the moment, but I'm on my own and I've got my little candle lit and it feels quite nice and it's very lovely. I'm having a nice time. But it also feels a little bit like when you read someone else's introduction to them, it kind of feels like you're at a dinner party or something and you just have to sit there while they say nice things.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know do I just, thank you. You're saying those nice things about me. You're right. I am a very personable person.
Yeah. Also, the just as a bit of insider knowledge for everyone, the intro that I was given was pieced together from 3 separate messages that Simon sent to me mere moments ago on Facebook.
Well, to be fair, and to provide a small amount of context there, Jacinta sent me a message and she said, start thinking about your introduction. And my immediate thought was, I don't know if we can swear on this podcast. Can we swear on this podcast?
Yeah, you fucking can.
My immediate thought was, fuck, I need an introduction. Oh, no.
Well, Simon, just to allay any fears that anyone might have as to why the hell you're on this podcast, can you at least tell us what your situation is vis-a-vis mental health, if you don't mind?
That is an excellent question. I am probably a walking example of taking way too long to do anything about your mental health. So I've known Jacinta since we were at university together. We've been friends for, oh God, over a decade now. Jesus.
13 years.
And it's 13 years.
Yeah, man.
Grave calls to all of us. And Rutherford as well. I know you very well, and we've been friends for the same amount of time. And I think we could probably both agree that there was some stuff going on there for quite a while. Yeah. And I always thought, no, I'm just quirky. And it turns out, no. So about 18 months ago, I was actually going to bring it along because I was going to do a very Joan Didion thing and read it to you. But somewhere in my paperwork, I have the letter that my GP gave to me when she diagnosed me with anxiety, GAD. And that was sort of the beginning of what is an ongoing, I don't want to say journey. Oh God.
Oh, look, everyone says it. I know. It's such a gross word, but it's honestly the only word that comes to mind, really.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess ostensibly anxiety, which if you haven't been able to tell already in the 3 minutes that we've been on the air, is present. And look, probably some other stuff, but we're figuring it out as we go.
Mm-hmm. How does that anxiety play out for you? Just like the normal way, panic attack kind of stuff?
I mean, kind of, yeah. I always thought about it as something that was just like the situations that I always found myself in, which is, always feeling a little bit out of your depth and, a little bit sort of, 5 seconds slower than everyone else around you and trying to keep up all the time. And that sort of image of the duck, very, very calm on top, but like the legs are going mad under the water. And I always thought it was always that, environmental, you're just in a situation, it's just that your job's really stressful, or, it's just that you've never really made friends easy kind of thing. It's, it's all that kind of stuff. And then COVID happened, and like the rest of the country, I found myself inside on my own, spending an awful lot of time in my own head. And I just started to sort of catalog all of the times that I felt anxious or a little bit off or a little bit sort of stressed or nervous, or on the inside like a quaking kitten, and on the outside trying to go, everything is fine.
Yeah.
And I realized it was kind of more often than not. So I thought, okay, maybe there's sort of
would you say that it was the COVID period where, and you had a pretty rough time during that time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you say that it was then and sort of everything culminating at that point that led you to seeking a diagnosis?
Yeah, absolutely. I could almost like pinpoint the day.
Right.
Because I was living on my own, which I had done for a couple of years, and it wasn't sort of like a loneliness thing. I do quite well on my own, but what I found was all of a sudden I was in my apartment in this space that for literally years I had only ever slept in. Like I didn't have, like, I had furniture and all that kind of stuff, but I didn't have like a lot of furniture. I didn't have art on the walls. I didn't have like hobbies in the house or anything like that. It was just this space that I came to when I wasn't doing anything else.
Yeah.
And, I live in Newcastle in New South Wales. It's a beautiful regional city. There's always something to do. And so like I spent a lot of time in the city, whether I was at work or thinking about work or I was, doing something. But I just found that it wasn't until I was inside and couldn't leave that I realized, oh God, I actually don't spend a lot of time here on my own, in my own head, thinking my thoughts and doing all that kind of stuff. So it initially manifested as going a little bit mad on, on online shopping and buying a lot of sort of plush furnishings, and all of a sudden taking up an art hobby where I collect art and put it on the walls. And, I burnt through COVID hobbies at a clip, and the feeling didn't go away. And so I thought, all right, maybe it's time to sort of look into this. And I made an appointment with my GP and went and spoke to her for about 45 minutes, and she was lovely the entire time, and just sort of the whole time just going like, yep, okay, yep, sure. And like making notes as GPs tend to do. And I honestly thought at the end of the conversation she was going to say, look, you've got a very stressful job, or you've got this or you've got that, and sort of confirm that idea that it was all this like environmental influence. And it was a lot of that. I wasn't looking after myself. I wasn't exercising as much as I should have. I wasn't sleeping very well. And because I wasn't sleeping very, very well, I was drinking a lot of coffee. And when I was drinking a lot of coffee, I wasn't sleeping very well.
Yeah.
And then, it sort of that sort of vicious cycle. So yeah, we sort of worked on that initially, and things sort of settled a little bit, but there was that still, it's like waking up with like a knot in your chest,
Yeah.
It's that thing where it's kind of like, I don't want to go to sleep, because if I close my eyes, I just have to be alone in the dark for a moment. And that's terrifying. So we talked about that. I did a few sessions with a psychologist, and yeah, here I am now.
Right. Are you still seeing the psychologist?
No. So I was seeing a guy called Alex, who was brilliant. And that was during the time that I think it was the federal government it was kind of like a COVID package where, you could access psychology services, as part of the COVID package. It sort of fell broadly under that banner. You'd think a journalist would know the details, but no.
Shameful.
No, he says, hoping you can't hear him typing to Google what it was. So yeah, I went through a series of those sessions and then had a couple of those on the other end. And to be honest, I kind of got to 2 points. I realized that like I felt like we were sort of chipping away kind of at trodden ground. And at the time, I felt like I was starting to get a handle on this thing. Like the feelings were still there, but I could kind of, they weren't this sort of like big amorphous kind of octopus that lived in the corner that I couldn't get my hands around. I sort of knew what the feelings were. I knew what to expect when they happened, and I was sort of working my way through it, which is kind of where I am still now. But yeah, so we got to the end of those sessions. I had a few more. My psychologist moved to another practice, I think, or went sort of independent or something. I remember getting an email from him, and he was saying like, oh, this is my new email. And yeah, it just kind of petered out.
Was that practice not in Newcastle?
No, it was. But we used to sort of have these Skype sessions, or, whatever Skype is in the modern age, Google Meet or whatever. So yeah, we would meet online and have these sort of telehealth sessions, and they just kind of petered out. I found that I sort of had this handle enough that I could get about and do the business that I needed to do and do the work that I needed to get through. And yeah, I've just been sort of chipping away at it since then in the game.
So that you said that's where you're at now. Do you still get, I mean, obviously everyone gets anxious at times, but do you still feel as though since that time there have been moments where you've slipped into that full-on anxiety state?
Absolutely. I think the difference is now, and like the thing that I probably wouldn't normally say this unless I was on this show, the thing that I have noticed like the biggest change in the way that I sort of feel when these kind of things happen now, since getting the diagnosis and going through that process and taking some medicine, which is good for you. The thing that I've noticed since then is when those sort of particularly anxious moments do happen, it's not that you don't feel them, but you kind of know what they are.
Yeah.
And you don't have that, I don't have that feeling that I had before where it was kind of like, oh, I don't know why I'm binge watching Community and kind of crying when Donald Glover leaves. I know why I'm doing that now.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, oh, that's right. It's, this is going to be a way that you feel for a while. And then I've actually never got to ask someone about this before. I'd be interested to kind of ask you, when you feel yourself slipping into that, like I find it really helpful. I find that thing really helpful because I can sort of step out of myself and look at it like from a third person point of view and sort of go, oh, like I can figure this out, you know? And I know where it begins. I know where it ends. I know the sort of messy bit in the middle where, things are a little bit shaky, but like I know where the end is.
It's kind of, I do that. And I think it becomes a little bit easier to do the more times it happens for obvious reasons. But
you kind of like analyze it as it's happening.
Yeah.
I don't know why that's helpful, but there's something about that. You're sort of like dissecting the frog inside your brain kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's the basis of CBT, is to look at it from an analytical perspective and figure out whether or not the thought is useful No, useful is not the right word, but like, yeah, as you said, like dissect it like a frog. You're breaking it down into its base components and figuring out, is this true? You know, is this me, I guess.
Yeah, like if you know something, it's not as sort of frightening as if you don't know it. Like if a horror movie was shot with perfect Wes Anderson lighting, it wouldn't be as scary.
I don't know. I reckon that would be bloody terrifying, because you go in expecting a Wes Anderson movie, and then all of a sudden, bloody, I don't know who's one of his regulars is, Jason Schwartzman comes around the corner bearing an axe.
It's funny you said it's probably a bad example, because my girlfriend and I, Lou, we've been watching Wes Anderson's adaptations of Roald Dahl on Netflix.
Oh yeah,
little short films, and we watched The Wonderful Life of Henry Sugar, which I'm 100% saying that title wrong. And then we watched Poison, and we thought, oh yeah, this is going to be like, you know, quirky Wes Anderson, funny flick. And then we watched The Ratcatcher, and we're just consumed by fear. Because if you've watched it, there's a very particular point. I'm not going to spoil it for anyone, but there's a very particular point in that short film where it takes a turn. And then we watched The Swan. And I don't know how Lou felt about that one. We didn't really talk about it, but I watched that, and I was sort of in between intense sorrow and kind of horror at the humanness of the whole thing, you know?
Yeah, right.
Like, oh, this is a bit real, Wes. This is a bit too real. Can we go back to the foxes now? But yeah, I've led us down a tangent. Sorry.
No, that's good. That's fine. This is what the show is about.
I think to, you know, get us back on topic, it's being able to analyze the feeling as it's happening and pick it apart the way that I would with a story that I'm working on, or, you know, and kind of turn it into a story even, you know, break it down into its constituent parts and then put it back together in a way that makes sense. The feeling then doesn't feel so overwhelming and sort of foreign and with all of these twists and turns in it. You know, it sort of feels like, oh, okay, I know what the next beat's going to be, and I know why it's going to be the next beat.
Yeah. In pulling back the veil and seeing the code, so to speak, of the way that you react to certain situations, and see like a logical step-by-step process by which you go through all the different emotions and thoughts and stuff, and can see the thing coming from a mile, maybe not a mile away, but, you know, you can see it coming around the corner. Would you say that allows you to be a little bit more relaxed and, I guess, go with the flow of how things just kind of play out as they do? You know what I mean? Like, when you get anxious, do you just kind of like, oh, okay, here it's anxiety time. I'm just going to ride with it until it's done, and then I'll be good.
And I think what it does is it necessarily reduces the horrible bit, you know, because suddenly the horrible bit doesn't come with all of the sort of uncertainty and upset feelings of like, oh, I don't know what this feeling is. I don't know why I'm feeling it. Why am I like, why is everyone else just being able to, you know, get around and buy groceries and I'm not, you know, why is this happening? I don't understand. You know, it sort of removes all of that baggage, and the horrible bit is still pretty horrible, but it's less of riding sort of 6 roller coasters at once and more just, okay, I just need to get through this one.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And you can see the horrible bit as a temporary thing.
Yeah. And you can sort of, it's, you know, that old adage, you know, this too shall pass, and et cetera, et cetera. You're sort of like, oh, okay, like I know what this is. I know why I'm feeling this way. It's not very nice, but, and like it's helped me better understand like my friends and my family even, because you, like when you understand that about, like when you understand that your brain is kind of a puzzle that you haven't quite figured out, and you're just sort of sitting there trying to put it all together and do all that kind of stuff, you suddenly become sort of more aware that everyone else isn't sort of getting around the grocery store with complete ease.
Absolutely.
And, you know, you can kind of appreciate a little bit better that everyone's brain is a puzzle that everyone just hasn't quite figured out yet. And that's kind of the work, you know.
What a beautiful sentiment, Simon. you should write, you know, for a living, because that was gorgeous. No, but seriously, that's a really lovely thing, and probably going to be the title of this episode. We'll see.
Well, I think that's it, right? Like, I think it's just one of the things that my work has taught me, and like I love my job. I love my job to bits. Like I could talk to you all day about, you know, the interesting people that you get to talk to and all that kind of stuff. Like I genuinely, I'm one of those sort of like, you know, horrible people who make dinner parties very boring because you're just like, no, I really actually love my job and let me tell you more about it. But one of the things, like the first thing that it sort of taught me, and the thing that then it just like keeps reinforcing every time I pick up the phone or every time you go out and meet someone, is people are like, everyone is just really, really complicated in really amazing ways. And, you know, everybody's got something that they're trying to work on. And I think it's a very eye-opening experience to be able to see that in other people, and it helps you understand yourself. And, you know, it helps you sort of understand, okay, like it's all right that I don't have everything figured out, but it's still important that I try to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, it sort of lands that responsibility on your shoulders to say, no, you have to, you know, you have to work at this. Like you can't just sort of throw your hands up and say, oh, I'm a bit complicated and everybody just has to deal with it, because, you know, that's not fair. It makes you want to keep chipping away at the puzzle in your head and keep trying to solve the Rubik's Cube. But it also makes you appreciate that, you know, when you're walking down the street, if someone's having a bad day, or if someone's, you know, not quite feeling that the way that they feel like they want to today, or, you know, like you have 1,000 times when you walk down the street and think, oh God, like I just don't want to talk to anybody or see anybody or do anything, you suddenly have a great sort of appreciation that, you know, sometimes everybody might feel like that. And I'm not saying walk out and just start hugging people in the street, but like be kind.
Just simple awareness. Yeah. Well, yeah. You know that David Foster Wallace speech, the "This Is Water" speech. I probably harped on to you about it before, but it kind of that sentiment reminds me of that a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I actually have a question on that, but I'll come back to that question after we've had a quick commercial break, because we have those on this program.
Oh, I love these.
Yes, and we'll be back in just a second with more questions for Simon McCarthy.
Have you been wanting to try a natural deodorant or try and bring more eco-consciousness into your self-care routine, but heard too many horror stories about friends who've tried a natural deodorant and have had allergic reactions or itchy pits, and you just weren't willing to give it a go? Wild is here to save the day. Wild is so great because it's a natural deodorant that actually works, which that is 100% tick number one for me. Stop there, no need for anything else. But on top of that, it's got a fully sustainable design. It's super convenient because you can purchase one-offs or you can have a flexible subscription. Everything is delivered straight to your door, so there's no grocery shopping issues needed. It's customizable, so you can pick any case color and scent combinations. Mine is a lovely teal with my name on it, and my favorite is the jasmine and mandarin blossom scent. And it's eco-friendly with all natural ingredients, so it's aluminium and paraben-free, as well as vegan and cruelty-free, which are huge wins for me. Go wild today with a special discount of 25% off your first order when you use the code DB at checkout. Go to wearewilds.com and use DB at the checkout. Enjoy!
Welcome back from our commercial break, and as you already know, because I'm hoping you haven't clicked or swiped or whatever away from this podcast, we are talking to Simon McCarthy, journalist, confidant, absolute champion. And before we took the break, we were talking about how being able to do the work that you're in as a journalist has allowed you to essentially open yourself up to various different narratives that could be possible that other people are having. It allows you to be more empathetic. And I believe that having a general sense of empathy is a really good way to deflect or beat back against some of the negative thoughts that people have. Like, for example, one thing that people say that practitioners might say to someone who's depressed is, what would you say to one of your friends if they were feeling the way that you do? And, you know, your mileage may vary with that approach. I'm wondering, Simon, what techniques other than that and just kind of living in the moment and you know, letting things pass, did you pick up from your time in counselling?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the thing is, like, you know, nobody wants to walk out and be like, yes, I, Simon, an empath, feel the following. But
yeah, don't say that. Don't anyone. If anyone listening to this declares themselves an empath after listening to this episode, just check yourself.
But I think, yeah, so there's one technique that my my psychologist gave me. He was really great. He had this great technique that he'd do with me where we wouldn't sort of necessarily unpack a huge amount in the session, but he'd sort of like breadcrumb me into figuring it out, on my own, which I'm explaining it terribly because I make it sound like he wasn't helping at all, but he definitely was, and he just kind of like clicked onto that bit in your brain that sort of wants to chew at an idea and dig and figure it out kind of thing. So he'd do a lot of things where I'd sort of talk to him about something that was bothering me or something that was on my mind, and he'd say, oh, it actually makes me think about this particular article that I was reading the other day and by this psychologist. Go and look that up and read it, and we'll talk about it next session kind of thing. And I go, yes, homework.
Nerd.
I know. No, I look back on it now and I realize that, like, this poor man he just had to sit there the whole time while I sat there going, teacher, didn't we have homework? But one thing that he told me, which sticks with me a lot, and like I find myself going back to this analogy all the time, because we were talking about like the way that you perceive yourself and the way that others perceive you and what you see and what other people sort of see. And, he was trying to sort of get across the idea that just because my brain goes over and over a thing constantly and like picks it apart and like replays conversations in my head or something like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that anybody else is doing the same thing. And he used this analogy of like a barbershop. He said, when you're sitting in a barbershop, and he said, you're looking in the mirror straight ahead of you. And he said, you're looking at what the barber's doing and, you're picking apart everything and you're sort of thinking, oh, is it a little bit too short? Is that, not quite right? What's anyone going to think? What do I think about this? And your brain's kind of going over and over and over. Like just by sort of physics, the person sitting in the chair next to you doesn't have the same view.
Yeah.
Like, they literally don't have the same view. Like they see a different part of your head. And that, I don't know why that image sort of stuck with me. But it's really, particularly when I sort of find myself getting into those loops of looking back on something that I've just done and thinking, oh God, they must think I'm such an idiot. Oh God, like I flubbed that question in that interview. God, they must think I'm such an idiot. They must think I'm so terrible at my job. God, why am I even doing this? I don't know. Whoever thought it was a good idea to give me this job? What were they thinking? Or that I went through a stage where if I wrote a story, I would have a full-blown panic attack the night before it came out. And I would just be like sitting in my house or sitting in the kitchen or sitting in my room or something like that, just anxiously reading and rereading and rereading and rereading the story on the page that I knew was already rolling off the printers. And so there was nothing that I could do about it, even if I did find anything, but like just constantly dissecting every sentence that I'd written and trying to figure out, is there any way that this could have been taken out of context? Oh, did I get this right? Did I get this right? And going back over interviews and going back over transcripts and things like that. And it was that sort of analogy of the barbershop that helped me get a handle on that. I still panic when I write something. But you sort of get a handle on it and you sort of think, okay, I have a responsibility to get everything right. And, I take that responsibility very seriously. But there is an element of this where people will ultimately come to their own conclusions about what you've written down. And if you're as clear as, you possibly can be, and if you've checked all your boxes and you've done your due diligence and you've set out with good intent and all that kind of stuff, like all of those things that you have to do, then people will ultimately come to the conclusion that you want them to. But there's an element there where you kind of have to take your claws out of it and let the thing go.
Yeah.
And that is kind of true of a lot of stuff. It's not just that. It's not just that sort of like creative process of, okay, dear writer, pet, let it go off to the editor now and let them do their bit. The same thing with like if you have a disagreement with, your partner or something like that, you can talk it out and you can figure it out, and they probably won't hate you forever for disagreeing with them.
Yeah.
And, you probably will talk again in the morning if you've done conflict well, and, you'll probably talk about it in a really healthy way, and that will be fine. And then, life goes on kind of thing. Like you are allowed to take your claws out of that moment and stop replaying it constantly in your head so that you can't sleep, because the person sitting next to you in the barber seat has, by the mere fact that they're there, a very different view of your head than you do.
Yeah.
So yeah,
but it's very in the moment that's happening. Like it's sometimes not as easy to just take your claws out of the thing though if you're obsessing over it. Because like I'd imagine because and I don't want to psychoanalyze you because that's not my job. But it sounds like
what do you mean you don't give medical advice?
No, I don't. Just have you even listened to the show all the way to the end? It sounds like, as well as the generalized anxiety, that you have some imposter syndrome fun things going on as well.
Oh yeah, I think. Well, I mean, I dread to say it because I think everybody has it to some extent, right? Like
unless you're a narcissist.
Yeah, it's kind of like that that thing that who was it? I think it might have been like a PE teacher or something in high school who said to me once, "A body absent of all stress is dead." Because I was talking about like, how do we fix stress? And then she said, well, if you fix it completely, you're dead.
Yeah.
Like, so I think, in that regard, like everybody has a bit of imposter syndrome. I think if you're in any kind of creative industry, which I'm probably saying because all of my friends are creatives and I've always been in a creative industry, but I think if you're in any kind of creative industry, there's an element of that work where you are constantly putting a little bit of yourself up in front of people, and the necessary sort of transaction of that is all of those people get to have an opinion on that little bit of you that you put up, kind of thing.
Yep.
And sometimes those opinions are good, and sometimes those opinions are really helpful, and sometimes
it's an absolute fucking cosmic joke that people who are creatives are required to be vulnerable. They have to exhibit vulnerability and are also some of the most anxious people in the world. Isn't that a fucking joke?
But I think, it's probably like, it's almost certainly true of any industry, really. Because I mean, if you really care about what you do, or if you really care about the thing that you make, then it's inevitable that it will become a part of the way that you think of yourself and feel about the way that you are. And it helps helps you figure out who you are in your head. Do you know what I mean? So, I don't think vulnerability is necessarily sort of exclusive to creative people. I think we definitely feel it.
I think we deal with it a lot worse than other people.
A lot. Yeah. But maybe it's just that we don't deal with it well, and that's sort of the defining part of the industry is everybody feels vulnerable in their work. It's just creatives don't handle it well.
Yeah, exactly. And then they make really, really beautiful arts from their anguish.
But I also think it's somewhat of a fallacy that creatives have to feel bad about themselves. Like I don't think you have to be miserable to make good art.
Absolutely.
I think you just have to really care about what you're doing, and you have to be willing to work at it. And I think really caring about what you're doing, and also knowing that you're not perfect at the thing that you do, because that inevitably gives you that drive to keep working at it, right? Because you're sort of sitting there going like, oh yeah, no, like I know what to fix next time. I can tinker with this. I can, add a panel on here, kind of thing. Really caring about what you're doing, realizing that you're not and probably never going to be perfect at it, but like you want to keep trying anyway. I think that is, that's everybody has that imposter syndrome. It's just sort of how much it takes over your brain and how well you deal with it when it happens.
Yeah.
I genuinely can't remember if I've answered your question.
It doesn't matter. I think you did. Yeah. No, you did. I think actually as well, I like slammed two questions, or at the very least an exposition into a question that didn't actually match. And I was just like trying to segue into, I don't know. Doesn't matter.
So I've caught myself doing this in interviews now, and I don't know when I started doing it, but I go back through and I check my notes and like listen to the transcript and go through and like listen to the tape and read the notes that I made, and I've caught myself doing this thing in most interviews now where I will just detour in the middle and talk about something that happened in my day, and this poor person on the other end of the phone just has to sit there while I tell them about something that's happened in my life, which may or may not have like any relevance to what we're talking about, but it feels like the right thing to say at the time.
Yeah. Look, I think from the end of someone who is doing the interview, Whenever we get people on, such as yourself and others who have done that, I find it delightful because I don't know, I just extra content that is, you know, maybe not even adjacent to what we're talking about can be a nice little reprieve, and it's good. So it's fine.
Well, this is what I found is it's sort of it's about 1 in 3, 1 in 2, I'd say, where I'll go on one of these tangents, and the person on the other end of the conversation will have something really insightful and really interesting and really impactful to say. And then it's this brilliant part of the story, or it's just this brilliant thing that I get to carry away and like, oh, that was actually really good advice. I'm really glad I spoke to that person. Or it's sort of, it's about 1 in 3, 1 in 4, where I've just gone on a complete tangent, and at the end of it, they sort of go, yeah, no, that's
interesting. Yeah.
Anyway, so
won't be asking that question again. I do have another question. I've got a couple more. Do you think that you'd ever, at this stage in your life, and I know this is kind of like, this is such a sort of left of field hypothetical question that no one can really answer. However, I'm going to ask you anyway. Excellent. Would you ever consider going back to getting therapy at this stage in your life? Do you think it's something that you would ever consider doing?
It's funny that you say that, because it's something that Lou and I have been talking about a bit recently. I don't think it's any, surprise that we're living through complicated times, I guess. And I'm by no means like a hard-hitting, exclusive breaking news agenda commandeering journalist by any stretch of the imagination. I love what I do and I like what I do. But, there's people whose job that is, and they're very, very good at it, and all power to them. I really, really want to be them when I grow up. But at the moment, I'm just a little guy.
Simon's 8 foot tall, by the way.
But there's something about sort of, being part of the daily news cycle, and like a lot of people being at the mercy of a complicated economy that sometimes feels like it's not always working, in the way that you want for the people that you want it to work for. And you're sort of very aware of, one, how sort of privileged you are to be in the position that you're in, but also knowing that there's a bunch of people out there who are sort of really at the mercy of what feels like sort of big, overwhelming forces.
Yeah.
And you know that they're out there because you feel it too, kind of thing. And yeah, that's something that that Lou and I have been talking about a little bit recently. And there's been sort of some ups and downs, and some things that we've sort of both found lately. We're sort of saying to each other, okay, maybe it's time to think about getting some help, or maybe it's time to sort of explore this other thing that's kind of been biting at the back of our heads for a while. And yeah, work's never done, I guess, is probably the short answer of that. And yeah, absolutely, I have thought about it quite sort of seriously recently, actually. So yeah,
that's good. I mean, as you would know from listening to every single one of our episodes, which you have, Simon, you've listened to every single one of our episodes, haven't you?
Yes. Some of them twice.
We are very pro getting help in whatever form that might be on Differently Brain. Where it's always good to hear someone kind of say that as well, that they're even looking into it or open to the idea. So,
and I mean, it just helps, right? Like, I mean, obviously there's, the elephant in the room is that psychology services and psychiatry services are almost prohibitively expensive to access, and the opportunity to bulk bill is getting smaller and smaller and smaller to see a GP, unfortunately. And there's a lot of people who feel sort of locked out of being able to access this kind of stuff. And there's no simple answers to these kinds of things. It's just complicated from every angle, unfortunately. But yeah, I think if you're able to access that help, and obviously everyone should be able to access that help when they need it. But if you are able to access that help, I think the biggest takeaway, at least for me, was it's just another perspective. It's someone else, it's some other third-party observer who can sort of look at the situation and go, oh, maybe that's the answer, you know, or go and read this article and we'll talk about it next week. And oh, yes, right, I'll go and do that.
That's is that your psychologist voice?
He would be mortified if he thought I was doing an impersonation. Rightly so.
I have got a final question for you, Simon, and this is a question that is always one that pops up every now and again on our episodes. And I'm gonna word it slightly differently though.
Okay.
Have there been any representations of people with anxiety or just any characters where you're just like, yeah, I feel seen. This is exactly me, and I get that within my every fiber of my being. Characters, or not, I mean, characters is one facet, but you know, it could be some fucking journal that you read, or even an interview that you might have done in your job. I don't know. Take the stage.
I mean, there's constantly, it's almost constant that we'll be sitting at home of a weeknight watching TV or you know, watching a movie or something like that, and someone will go, oh, that's you. And it's kind of like a fun game that we play.
Yeah.
Would you believe that none of them are coming to mind immediately, and I'm going to kick myself after we
Oh
stop
my
recording.
God.
But there is actually one person who I constantly go back to, and that is Elif Barterman, is a writer, writes for the New Yorker sometimes, and she did singularly my favorite interview of all time. Like it was amazing. It was perfect. It was brilliant. I go back and listen to it all the time. It was on a podcast called Long Form, and she came on to talk about her book, which is called The Idiot. And she was also talking about this article that she'd just written for the magazine a few years ago now about traveling to Japan and finding this industry where you could rent family members, basically rent actors who would pretend to be part of your family. And the idea was that if you were in a situation where you were getting married, for example, and you didn't talk to this particular aunt or uncle, but it was very important that your aunt or uncle be at your wedding for whatever reason, then you could ring up the service and say, I need an uncle for like 4 hours tomorrow. And they would show up and they'd do the job. And just listening to Elif talk about that experience and talk about her process and talk about the way that she writes, she is such an intelligent and thoughtful person, but at the same time, she gives off this sort of energy of just constantly thinking about like what she's just said, you know? And constantly taking it apart and putting it back together, and just like an endless kind of curiosity about the way that people are and that kind of thing. I don't see myself in her. I just want to make that very, very clear because she's brilliant, and I'm...
Hey now, none of that.
But, you know, when I grow up, I would like to be Elif Barterman. I think is the answer to that question. Yeah, and she's just and like her writing's beautiful. I went away and bought and read her book because I heard her on that podcast, and yeah, I go back and reread it all the time because it's brilliant. It's really, really good. And I think the bit that I relate to most, I think, is she has an incredible way of balancing two contradictory ideas at the same time, which is that you can be incredibly thoughtful about something and be constantly trying to sort of figure something out, but at the same time you can recognize the kind of inherent silliness in something that you did like 15 minutes ago. Like I thought I was so clever when I did that, and oh no, you know. It was just really, really nice to hear someone who was that articulate and that clever and that thoughtful and creative, but still doing that, still having that sort of, you know, uncertainty about things and stuff like that. So yeah, Elif, if you hear this, we should go and get coffee or something, because I'd like to, you know, talk to you for hours on end and just hear your thoughts about stuff.
Elif, if you hear this, plug our show on long form, please. Thank you.
You would run a mile. I would too. My God. This guy just talked about me for like 10 minutes on a podcast. I don't know what
Well, Simon, first of all, let me ask, do you have any other things you wanted to talk about before I wrap up?
Oh, there's so many. How are you? How are you doing?
Oh, I'm all right. I'm good.
Yeah?
I mean, well, that's just the response you give, isn't it? That's just what you say. I am currently sitting in Mum's walk-in wardrobe with a sheet over my head, cross-legged, with my feet falling asleep. And that's how I am.
Amazing. Amazing. What a life of luxury you lead.
Yeah.
No, it's lovely to chat with you, buddy. I've missed doing this actually. I should say for whoever is listening to this, I mean, if you're still listening, I can only say I'm sorry. But Lockie and I used to do this at university, drunk.
Yeah.
But
yeah, there weren't microphones involved, but we would just...
Yeah, there weren't microphones involved, and they were far less articulate. But we used to do this, and it was always the highlight of my week when I got to sit down and just chat with you about stuff that's going on and talk about stuff, because you are... Yeah, I'm gonna do... This is the mirror, see? You say all the nice stuff about me at the start, and now you just have to sit here and like listen to me say nice things about you. You are genuinely one of the nicest people I've ever met, and you're so, thoughtful, and I would never get tired of talking to you, buddy. You're wonderful.
Oh, mate, thank you.
So there.
Stop taking over my goddamn podcast. Let me end the show. Simon, we'll probably get you back on at one point or another to chat about chatting about random topics that might be of interest if you are interested.
Out of curiosity, who do you guys have like return guests? How many times have you had like the one guest on? Who's my competition for return guests?
We've had Kay Kerr twice. We've had Jordan Steele John twice.
Oh, I loved his episodes. He was good.
Yeah, he's super fun.
I really enjoyed Jordan's episodes. I go back and listen to them sometimes because he's a very funny guy, but he's also very, very articulate and
absolutely.
He's a very cool dude. I like him a lot.
But yeah, like, just if you come on for 3 episodes, then you're already ahead of everyone. So
I mean, book me in now. Do you want to do another one?
Yeah, let's do another one right now. But actually, thank you for coming on this episode to begin with, and for chatting with me. It's been bloody fantastic, and I know for a fact that a lot of people are going to get a lot of things out of this episode. So good on you. Thanks for coming on, mate. You're a bloody legend.
Thank you for having me. This was so nice. Thank you for listening to Differently Brained, the podcast. If you would like to hear more of our episodes, they're available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify or wherever you like to listen.
I'm just going to clip that and put it at the very end. Friends, if you want to listen to more of our episodes, obviously do what Simon just said, but also come and join us in our various other spaces, such as our Facebook group, our Instagram. I've made a couple of very fun Instagram things lately that I'm getting used to the medium, and I need validation. And yeah, just keep in touch and stuff. Jacinta normally does these outros, so I'm a bit out of my depth.
I was trying so hard not to laugh. I need validation.
Yeah, so we'll catch you next time for another stellar episode of Differently Brained. Say goodbye, Simon. Simon, say goodbye. Simon.
Goodbye, Simon.
Goodbye. Differently Brained shares the opinions of individuals and does not consider your personal circumstances. Differently Brained exists purely for information purposes and should not be relied on as health or medical advice. Because no brain is the same, please consult your healthcare professional for your personal medical needs.